Hello and welcome to this special telecast on the Budget 2018 as we analyze the fine print of Budget 2018. The aftershocks of long-term capital gains tax are rocking the last street just a day after Finance Minister Jaitley presented the Union Budget for FY19. Stocks fell like 9 pins, knocking down almost 2.5% in fact from benchmark indices. The Sensex tanked 840 points, posting its biggest single-day loss since November 2016. Nifty too fell over 250 points to close at 10,760. Market analysts tell ET now that apart from the tax burden, investors are a little worried about the stress on the fisc.
In fact, not just that, international ratings agencies have raised the red flag over poor GST collections and the impact of high oil prices on the fiscal. Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's statement raising questions over Jaitley's fiscal arithmetic may have added fuel to the concerns. In fact, his own party member, former Finance Minister FM P Chidrambaram, has also sharpened the attack against the budget, stating that a scheme without money is like flying a kite without a string. Adding to that, the Finance Minister's own assertion that there is no question of a rollback on any proposal announced in the budget has market players worried. But of course, the Finance Minister and his team have had a very, very reasonable ground to do what they have done, and many experts on the street have lauded the efforts in such a constrained environment. Joining us on the show is the Department of Economic Affairs Secretary and one of the chief architects of the budget, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who joins us right here on ET now. And he's ready and willing to take questions from top market players like Neelkanth Mishra, leading economist Ajit Ranade, and our own consulting editor, Swaminathan Aiyaron. I'm Supriya Srinath, and with me is my colleague Sandeep Kurumurthy. Let's go straight into this big debate.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. This really is a dream panel in so many ways as we decode the fine print. Some of the finest minds coming together in this particular show. Let me start with you, Neelkanth Mishra, since a lot of the talk today is about the market. So I'm going to give you the privilege of getting the first question. What's behind the sort of market crash we've seen today, especially given the matured manner in which markets reacted yesterday to the budget proposal? What do you attribute it to? Is it on account of the long-term capital gains tax fine print, or is it on account of the action, the spillover action of what we're seeing in the bond markets with yields spiking to 7.6%?
No, I think the impact on the yields of the yields is definitely showing up, because just about the time that the economy was starting to revive, for a very large part of the economy which was getting funding from the bond markets, the cost of borrowing has suddenly shot up in the space of 4 months by almost 100 basis points. So while everyone keeps obsessing about the repo rate, as the market disintermediates, I think the bond yields become very important for the economy as well. And so that is clearly a concern. I think there is some, I think, sentiment impact of the long-term capital gains tax as well. But because of the grandfathering clause, we don't think that will be a very lasting one. But I would like to start off with, because I think on the bond issuance target given by the government, it seems quite benign. So clearly, the discomfort for the bond markets is coming from two main sources. The first is on the tax assumptions that are there in the budget, and the second is the impact of the MSPs. But MSP is a non-fiscal thing, so maybe I'll start off with a question on, so what is the underlying assumption on growth rates in GST revenues? Because there has been, I mean, there are all kinds of numbers flying around, 25 to 28%, some even have 35% that is implied when you look at the numbers in GST. And I can run you through how they are arriving at that. I think personally that is incorrect, and that the growth rates implied are more in the range of 10 to 14%. But I would like to hear you, sir, on what the government has assumed as the growth rate in GST collections in FY19.
Right. Just before I take it to Mr. Garg to answer that question on the assumption on growth rates and the point that Mr. Mishra does make about the bond market, Mr. Garg, I want you to answer the question on assumption on the growth rates. Is it perhaps feasible? Is it doable? But how worried is the government also of the rout in bond markets? We've seen yield spike 140 basis points in 5 months, 65 basis points in 5 weeks. There is, of course, a global play that's undeniable, but a lot of it is also on account of the state of the fisc, it seems.
Right. The bond yields had started going up right from July. and we have seen consistently this going up. Today, in fact, the bond yields have come down a tad lower than what yesterday. My sense is that possibly the full package of the fiscal consolidation has not been fully understood by the market players so far, and as they are developing a fuller understanding of this, this is bringing, I suppose, comfort, and this is giving that kind of sense of security to the market players. Let me tell you what. One, the fiscal deficit for the current year is 3.5%, and that is what we are going to achieve. We now plan to take it to 3.3% next year and 3% very soon. The Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act is being amended to put a statutory obligation on the government to bring the fiscal deficit down to 3% by 2021. So that's a statutory obligation which the government is assuming, and also that the debt to GDP ratio, which is for the central government around 47% today, to be brought down to about 40% in 6 years from now. That's 24-25. So the entire package of fiscal consolidation plan, I think it should be enough to assure that not only the government's draft on the savings is reducing, but it is getting statutory backing as well.
Right. Dr. Ranade, you want to comment on the market reaction that we've seen today? Do you think largely is it an account of the concern on the fisc that's at play, the bond markets, or is there something else at play? I know you believe there's a case for a long-term capital gains tax on equities, so I'm sure you support that move. But what explains this sort of a carnage that we've seen in equity markets today?
Okay, the team is to be commended because you faced several adverse macro. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so there are several there were several adverse macro challenges both domestically and internationally. So in the context of that, and it being a pre-election budget, so the long-term capital gains taxation issue was actually being discussed for almost 3 years. It is a direct tax. It partly contributes to reversing the trend of increasing share of tax revenues being indirect taxes that needs to be corrected. So it's a step in the direct direction. It's fair, it's efficient, and so I don't think today's carnage can be explained purely because of the LTCG issue. As Neelkanth also said, I think largely the concern is coming from the yields. So the yields have gone up by almost 140 basis points. It's 1.4 percentage points over the last 6 months. We talk a lot about RBI cutting rates by barely 25 basis points, which looks very difficult. But in fact, the impact of 140 basis points is huge. Imagine that from a year-to-year basis, if the interest rate burden of the Government of India, the biggest borrower in the system is Government of India, if their burden goes up by 50 basis points, that is almost like a 10% increase in interest outgo, which is 40,000 crores roughly equivalent to a full year MNREGA budget. So I think there is concern about that. So I'd like to ask Mr. Garg that what is the government going to do to contain this pressure on the interest rates due to the fiscal situation? For example, there is this one item on the overdraft from RBI. It's gone up by 300% in the last 2 years. It used to be budgeted at 1.6 lakh crores, which is the ways and means advances, the overdraft facility from the RBI. Today it's up to almost 4.8 lakh crores, and this is it's budgeted to go up to 5 lakh crores this year. So I think clearly the increase in revenue deficit. So this I think should remain. What is the government going to do to keep the pressure off the interest rates because of this borrowing from the Government of India?
Mr. Garg, you want to take that?
Yeah, but there is no overdraft which the government takes from the RBI, and there is a small ways and means advance, but that's too small. I think you're reading probably the treasury bills number, which on gross basis looks much larger than what it is. On the net basis, the treasury bills, and we have to take on the non-competitive basis whatever the state governments need to invest in the treasury bills. So that's not a major cause of concern at all. That in fact reduces our interest liability to some extent rather than making it go up. What matters most is what we borrow from the market in the form of our government securities and all. That is projected to come down next year to about 4 lakh crores, a little less than that from about 4 lakh 20,000 odd crores this year. So our draft on the real savings would be lower, and that should actually be helpful for calming the demand market.
No, fair point indeed, Mr. Garg, and I think that brings a much needed clarification on the overdraft bit. But I do want to ask you, while I understand, and I think most of our experts agree here, including yourself, that the carnage that one saw in Indian markets today is perhaps not all on account of LTCG. But I do just want to question you on one thing, and that's a question that we're getting constantly on our channel. Could the government not have done away with the security transaction tax? I think I completely echo and understand the Prime Minister's sentiment of every stakeholder contributing to nation building, but people are asking, why should we be taxed twice over? You have an LTCG, why continue with an STT as well?
See, STT was there when the short-term tax was also there. So this is different. Then it's a transaction tax, and whereas the short-term capital gains and the long-term capital gains tax the income. That distinction I think we should be quite clear about. There is no reason why the long-term capital gains, which is also a kind of income which is earned by the people, every other income suffers a tax. Why should long-term capital gains not suffer some tax? So it's a very fair, equitable kind of tax, and there is no correspondence. The finance minister made those numbers very clear that in the range of 3,67,000 crores rupees was claimed as long-term capital gains. A 10% of that would mean something like 36,000 crores, whereas the STT, which also covers all other kind of transactions in the derivatives and short-term trades, as well as on even in some transactions you make actually loss, is in the range of about 8,000 to 9,000 crores. So there is no STT is not supposed to replace the long-term capital gains. These two can exist together in my judgment.
Okay, that's the government's view on why STT and long-term capital gains tax can coexist. Okay, Swami, our expert. Let's get down to the fine print, Swami. Would you analyze the budget on ET now all day yesterday, and of course your column has been widely read today, but would you call this a growth budget? Because while you did compliment the government for resisting the temptation to splurge ahead of an election, what that also means is that all expenditure items are growing at less than the nominal GDP. So the public investment push for growth isn't going to be there. So is this a growth budget according to you, Swami?
No, I think you have to just get away from public spending to other issues. At Davos, Narendra Modi lambasted Donald Trump for protectionism and said, I'm going to go the other way. And lo and behold, now you produce a budget where on dozens and dozens of items, the import duty is being increased from 10% to 25, 20, 30, in one case 50%. This is out-trumping Mr. Trump. So I think there must be a confusion as to what is the direction of industrial policy. If we really think we are going back to import substitution, I mean, I find the duties are being defended as being they are needed for protection. I mean, can there be anything more echoing what Mr. Trump is saying? And if so, what is it that Mr. Modi means when he talks at Davos, and what is it that Jaitley means when he talks in New Delhi? I would say there is a confusion about the direction of India's industrial and economic policy, and surely this has to be an important reason for all investors to wonder whether they really should have as much money in India as before. The second issue I would like to take up is the fiscal one. Mr. Garg just said, well, we are going to have a law we are going to have a law to say this is going to be the fiscal deficit by 2020-21. But you know, we already had a law passed in 2003. We said that by 2008 we are going to get the fiscal deficit down to 3% and the revenue deficit down to 0. It is now 10 years afterwards, you still have not reached that fiscal target. Revenue deficit is more than 2%, 2.6%, could be 2.2% next year even, with all the efforts. So in other words, not only is the fiscal deficit high, but the quality of the fiscal deficit has deteriorated because the revenue deficit is now such a substantial part of the fiscal deficit. So it seems to me that at least on these two areas, on the fiscal slippage, again and again, nobody forced Mr. Jaitley in his first budget to say, I am going to bring it down to 3% in 3 budget, right? He chose this very, very onerous task and we applauded him for it. But after that, in 5 budget speeches, you have put off this 3% target 3 times. You have slipped 3 times in 5 years. So to me, there is an issue of government credibility on the fiscal side. There is an issue of government credibility on globalization and the direction of economic policy. And if you add those together, it seems to be an excellent reason for a highly inflated market to begin to wind downwards and have a major correction, even more than we've had already.
Right. Swami, okay, valid point, 2 points being raised by Swami there, Mr. Garg, would you just take them on? Are we embracing protectionism of a very soft kind? And this is against the spirit of Davos and what the Prime Minister spoke there, and the credibility on the fisc.
Let me respond to Swami's point on the revenue deficit, revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure and the quality issue. I think we should recognize that in terms of productivity of expenditure, in terms of quality of expenditure, both revenue and capital can be as productive or as non-productive, irrespective of whether it is a capital expenditure or a revenue expenditure. A good expenditure on education, health is quite productive. A bad expenditure on capital, creation of capital assets which don't deliver anything is not a good. And much of our capital expenditure done on the budget side is also on defense and others. From the economic point of view, they are not as productive as you can normally imagine to be. And therefore, there is a conscious decision to do away with this classification between revenue and what matters for the economy is what is the draft on the savings, and that is the fiscal deficit. How and where do you spend on revenue or capital should not be as much bothering the markets as the overall fiscal deficit is. So we have done away with the concept of the effective revenue deficit, and we have set no targets for the revenue deficit reduction to 0. In fact, the Act has been amended to remove that as a goal. So that is the way we see the fiscal deficit and the expenditure on the revenue and capital side. I think on the other question about protectionism, I think Mr. Adia is in much better position to respond. But let me give you my understanding. I think it's achieving 2 objectives. One, of course, is where very small, kind of very low technology products which are flooding Indian market, if you can protect those items to be produced here for meeting domestic demands. They're not good technology, good kind of products. So that's one objective. The other one, I think, is more essentially directed to encourage the foreign suppliers to produce things which they supply to India, and that gels with the objective of Make in India. The rates have not been increased or raised so much as to be qualified or as putting a wall for shutting out the foreign producers to come and set up factories and shops here. That fine tuning possibly is intended to achieve that objective, that yes, let the foreign suppliers come and supply to the Indian market. But rather than producing it elsewhere and supplying as final goods, why not come and produce it here? So that fine balance is attempted to be struck in terms of this duty rejig. It's not protectionism.
Okay. Fair enough. You know, the idea is not to put you in the hot seat, Mr. Garg, but yes, we've got some fine experts asking questions. But I've got one for Neelkanth Mishra, and I know Swami doesn't believe that this public investment push is critical. But Neelkanth, it's unlikely that private investment will come in in the near term, and with public investment being subdued, I'm trying to understand what is the lever for growth other than exports, because with crude where it is, if you just factor in the fact that there's a $20 hike in crude oil prices, then even the economic survey tells you that growth will take a knock of about 60 basis points. So suddenly even 7% for FY19 looks a bit challenging. I mean, am I being a little sort of pessimistic, or do you think there's need for this caution?
You're right. I think the economy is reviving or was reviving till December, January. I think so the growth rate in FY19 is likely to be better than in FY18, but the consensus expectation of or even I think in the budget, the expectation of about 7.5% or higher is something that does appear hard to meet. And I agree with you. I think while private capex is starting to take off, so we are starting to see some capex happening in steel, mostly in metals. I mean, some alumina plants seeking approval, zinc capacity is going up. There is new capex happening in oil. There's massive amounts of capex happening in telecom. So on some sectors it is starting to happen, but to put things in perspective, there was a time 5 years back when there was 30 million tons of steel capacity under construction. There was 80 to 100 gigawatts of power capacity under construction, and that 30 is now dropped to maybe 3 or 4, and there are some more plants that are on the steel side, and there is pretty much a lull on the power capacity side. So yes, I think private sector capex will take a while. The challenge also is, and which is why I think the government is trying to push things on the agricultural side, that we are effectively running a two-speed economy. I think, airline growth, car sales growth, and the growth in five-star hotel occupancy, anything which the top 20-30% of the economy does is doing well. Anything which is broad-based like cement, steel, the growth is actually quite weak. So with that, if half the economy is not seeing any growth, it's very hard to grow beyond 7%. So I fully share your concerns. And while I have the mic, I would like to pose another clarificatory question. I'm an analyst, so I need to round off my figures. There are two other concerns, Mr. Garg, which I think people have had, which I've heard, and I must say it would be good to get clarity on. The first is on your assumptions on the oil price, because there's been a lot of concern that the oil subsidy bill that is in the budget could be insufficient if oil prices were to stay at 70. And so what is the implied oil price? I know you have answered this question with, I think, or I've seen in the press about 65 or so. The numbers that when we look at the LPG prices, etc., was coming around to about 57. So we would like to see if we are right. And secondly, on this launch of the healthcare insurance program, the scheme is likely to be, I think it's a very ambitious scheme, I think perhaps much needed. But in terms of the budgetary allocation, and the questions are how much has been budgeted for this year, and now there was some Niti Aayog comment that it could be launched on the 2nd of October. So how much does the government expect to spend on it in the first year, and what kind of premiums per family should we be looking at?
Let me respond to that growth question before I come to this oil and the budgeting issue. I think the reading that the hotels, car and that sectors is doing well, and others, steel, cement, are not doing as well. I would request closer look at the construction sector growth in last 2 quarters, as well as the steel production, the cement production indexes, which are now available for the month of November and December as well. So these do indicate to us that there is, even in these areas which had for very different reasons, demonetization, RERA and other things, had a temporary little slowdown, the growth is coming up even those sectors. So and manufacturing has also seen green shoots and the growth coming up. So our expectation that next year we should have a growth between 7 to 7.5% is, I think, quite realistic, and we should be able to achieve that. On the oil side, I think there, in terms of direct provision in the government budget, there are only two items where this gets factored in a way, that too indirectly these days, is the LPG subsidy and the kerosene subsidy. The kerosene subsidy, for very good reasons, expansion of the Ujjwala program and switching over to the gas and otherwise, and kerosene itself becoming less of a preferred fuel. The kerosene subsidy is on the way out. We probably halved the provisions for the kerosene subsidy this year. The LPG gas subsidy is where there is direct implication that we have increased the provisions a little bit, and the connection between the oil prices and LPG prices is also not so direct and so one-to-one kind of thing. So we think we are at this point reasonably comfortable with the provision which we have made. Also, I think it's very difficult to say that oil would behave in a particular direction in the next year. Whenever there was prediction that the oil might go up, we have seen sometimes it actually moving the other way around, and the vice versa. So it's safe to not to take any extraordinary or any high projections to take into that account and wait how things work it out. The other concern, which is little more, I think, is in case the oil prices reach a certain level and it starts hurting the consumers, then there would be some implications for the excise duty, etc., that Finance Minister also referred in his comments today. That is, at this moment, we feel that we are at a level where still the government does not need to assume more of the responsibility for this kind of implication. But let's see how it works it out going forward. On the health issue and also to some extent on the MSP pricing, these are the two schemes which, when the budget estimates of being finalized at that stage, and as you know, that happens some weeks before. So these two schemes have not been fully factored into the budget estimates, but we have taken measures to put additional cess and others to generate enough revenue for funding these, especially the health scheme. The estimates are being worked out, and the parameters and the implementation for modalities of these schemes are being worked out. The MSP issue, the fiscal implications will start only after October, because this is applicable on the Kharif crops, and likewise the health scheme would take I think about 3 months time in the next fiscal to fully become operational. So, but whatever is needed, I think we will provide for that, and without bothering or without burdening the fiscal thing. There are some places we might do better than what we have projected. So on the net, I don't think we should be worried about that.
All right. On that note, we'll take a really quick breather here. We come back and put the spotlight on some of the other issues that are troubling investors, some of the other clarifications that we'd want Mr. Garg to make. Back in a moment. Keep it for duty now.
Back on ET now, this is the budget debate, and tonight we're discussing the budget fine print with the Economic Affairs Secretary and one of the key architects of Budget 2018, Mr. Subhash, Garg, and a wonderful panel of India's top economists quizzing him.
Dr. Ranade, while some amount of clarification is being made on MSP of cost plus 50%, obviously this is going to be inflationary. Obviously this will have an impact on deficit. We still don't know how the cost is going to be worked out. Will it be worked out on the Swaminathan formula of C2 or A2 and all of that? And some people also believe this is going to distort the crop pattern and all of this. How much sleep are you going to lose over this? And do you believe this was the best way to resolve the agrarian crisis? And of course, then you can go ahead with your question for Mr. Garg.
Mr. Garg, actually, before I come to MSP, I just wanted to flag two more issues. Again, since we are going into the fine print of the budget, please bear with me. One is that the entire fiscal slippage seems to be because of the revenue deficit having gone from a projected or a budgeted 1.9 or 1.8% to 2.2. And there also the main slippage has come because of the steep fall in non-tax revenues, namely from telecom sector and from the RBI dividends. So, the government actually has been pretty, successful in bringing down the ratio of the revenue deficit to fiscal deficit sharply by almost 14 percentage points from a peak of something like 79% to close to 60%, and then again it's going up. So, this is the concern that although you made the point that for next year you're not going to make a distinction between revenue deficit and fiscal deficit because spending on teachers and doctors and schools should be also seen as building human capital. But that's an issue I just wanted to flag. And the other issue is again related to fiscal situation, which is the small savings. The budgeted tapping of small savings, which is going up and up. It's almost, I think, 7 or 8 lakh crores. Now, this is the part of India's debt market which is not priced by market. It's not market related price. This is set by the government, and if the interest rate on this is set high, it's going to distort interest rates and put an upward pressure. It will undermine bank deposits and so on and so forth. So, this continued and increased dependence on small savings is something I think we need to watch carefully. But let me turn to MSP. See, the MSP is basically an option. When you provide a minimum price floor, you are selling the farmers an option. It's like selling a put option that, and it's you're giving it away for free. The actual outgo on MSP will depend on what the market prices come out to be. If the market prices are above MSP, there's no outgo. But if the market prices are below, then the government will have to reimburse. But my concern is the following, that there are many crops for which India is not competitive globally. For example, sugarcane. Our cost of production is already high, and then you're going to pay 50% more. And then to prevent imports into the country, you'll have to put an import duty on imported sugar. I'm just giving an example of one agricultural commodity, and then that will just create more inflation. And again we'll be back, because food is a big part of CPI. So, this looks like this strategy of again price intervention to help the farmer is again an old, tried, tested but somewhat failed strategy. We need to have, much different kind of strategy to increase farmers' income or productivity, direct linkage between producers and consumers, doing away with APMC, removing things like minimum export price restrictions on farm products. So, don't you think those are the measures which, because MSP is ultimately a price intervention, we've tried this for so many years, it doesn't really work, and it actually has a potential of creating inflation in the country.
Okay.
So, can you react to this?
Sure. Mr. Garg, given the paucity of time, I'd request you to specifically react to the question that Dr. Ranade had on MSP, because I need to get in a word from Swami as well. The point that he made on this price intervention, is that necessarily good given the fact that it's failed in the past? Quick, your response to that, sir.
Yes. Let me first, I think this clarification has been put out. The formula which is going to be adopted for this 50% is A2 and FL plus 50%, not C2. And when you see the current prices, he referred to the sugarcane issue. Sugarcane is already priced more than 50% over A2 and FL. So, there is no implication for sugarcane. In our judgment, having this formula and giving the farmers a 50% profit at least on the cost across all the MSP crops, in fact makes all crops to be treated equally by the farmers, and it takes away the preference for some of the crops which have a larger MSP price than their cost, and away from the crops where the MSPs are much lower and there is no profit margin for the farmers. In that sense, it should actually do away with the distortion in favor of certain crops and bring a choice and get the farmers to make a choice based on what is the best, what is land is best suited for, and what the market is prepared to get then. The MSP alone will not assure, that's the finance minister also said, and therefore we will have to make arrangements to ensure that this MSP price is delivered to the farmers, and that issue would also be debated and discussed, and necessary modalities worked out in form of some price differential or otherwise. And finally, the prices in agriculture crops, unless there is a demand supply match, there is a tendency to go up on if the supply is lesser than, and therefore we have to fine tune the export policy also very well to see that the surpluses productions are exported. In case we have deficit, we allow more of the import to take place. So this entire package, to my mind, will bring much more stability to agriculture crops pricing rather than what we see as volatility in some sense.
Right. Swami, I want to quickly ask you, I know Dr. Ranade asked this question, Mr. Garg has given an explanation, but I'm just curious to know, will MSP and the kind of intervention that we're looking to, bring some amount of sanity, some amount of easing of pain for the agrarian mess, will any of this help unless and until there are output side corrections made on agriculture? The prices on the other side are capped, exports get clamped. Unless and until the output side interventions are made on agriculture, will any of this accrue results? Swami?
No, I will simply say that I am dead against cost plus interventions. I mean, cost plus has been tried again and again in different industries. It is a very bad idea which produces the wrong results, some of which I think Ajit Ranade has just pointed out. I mean, when you have a choice between a large number of different crops, you should be focusing on those where you have the largest advantage, and you should be stopping the production of those where you don't have an advantage, right? In other words, there should be a larger return on some crops and a much smaller return on other crops, and others should be so unprofitable that you don't grow them at all. Instead, here you are saying on all these crops, on all of them, I'm going to have 50%. And this 50% idea, will you show me any evidence in international economics of this being a rational form of return? Is this the return? Is this the way returns are fixed anywhere in the world? They are not. This is a populist figure drawn out of a hat from a Swaminathan committee. It has no scientific basis that I am aware of. For any other industry, I mean, suppose you were producing a good and you said you are already getting full return for your labor, and you are covering all your costs, and you are then having a 50% margin above that, a lot of people would call that loot. So, I mean, I really need to, the entire basis of this 50% I would question. Over and above that, I would say, by doing this, you are getting into all kinds of perverse incentives. Normally, I should have an incentive to reduce my costs as far as possible. If I'm getting cost plus, what is my incentive to reduce my costs and be efficient? So I said the whole cost plus approach, I think, is wrong. I think we are going in the wrong direction here. We should be going in different directions altogether. In Telangana, where Ms. KCR said, instead of trying to go to individual crops, let me have a flat amount of subsidy per acre, regardless of what the farmer is growing. That is much less distortionary. That is much more effective. It does not affect the choice of crops. It does not reduce the incentive to cut your costs and be efficient. I think that kind of approach would be far, far better than this 50% cost plus approach.
Okay. Fair point indeed, Swami. It is critical best as always, but I want to get closing comments from all my panelists. Let's just say that this Swami was clearly not, this was a political decision, as simple as that, and it was followed of the Gujarat verdict. So I think this is not weighed in terms of an economic consequence, and I'm sure we can all sit in the studio and argue the lack of economic rationale for this. And then there are politicians who need to make these decisions. So I'm not going to, put Mr. Garg in this spot and ask him to respond. But let me get closing comments. And to you first, Neelkanth Mishra, which is the big picture for FY19 in light of what this budget has done or not done in terms of, the excess expenditure or going too populist. What's your outlook for FY19, both from a macro point of view and from an equity market point of view? Do you think it's going to be another sort of average year growing at about 7%? We've seen equity markets that have rallied way ahead of fundamentals. You've warned of that as well. What is your own outlook for FY19, both from a macro point of view and from an equity market point of view?
Conditionality there. I think the policymakers, and that includes the government and the RBI, need. Yeah, so the RBI and the government need to do something about the bond markets because I think the yield spike is really distorting the market and it's creating, I think, unnecessary tightening of monetary conditions in large pockets. And as Mr. Garg also has said, I mean, this should not be a problem given what the government borrowing has been, and given particularly that the state government borrowing, which earlier in this year people had been worried about, and that has also come out to be actually below what markets expected. About 2.5% of GDP is the fiscal deficit. So, so if the market, the bond market, stays as volatile and as steeply priced, the yields are as high as they are, then I think that could be actually a drag on growth, and it could even cause volatility in the markets if the FII bondholders cave in. But having said that, if assuming that things start to normalize, I think there are enough fundamental reasons why bond yields should be meaningfully lower 6 to 9 months down the line. Our view is that growth, while I acknowledge what Mr. Garg said, that the last 2 months steel demand and cement demand have indeed improved, but they are far below what they should be. They, in a decently growing economy, when India was growing decently, it was 7-8%. It was these were growing at in the high single digits to double digits, and we are far from seeing that right now. So I think the growth remains should remain below expectations, though better than last year. We in the markets are advising investors to be overweight sectors that have more global exposure. So we remain overweight on things like metals, on energy, on even IT services, which we upgraded in August. And underweight most of the domestic sectors like staples, discretionary, and also non-banking finance companies. We are neutral weight on private banks, and given the recapitalization of PSU banks, we've also gone overweight that. So that's our market positioning, and that doesn't change because of the budget.
All right, that doesn't change because of the budget, and there's yet another event, which is the Fed, which will perhaps change a little bit of things on Dalal Street. But Dr. Ranade, given the circumstances, given the macroeconomic picture, given the agrarian stress, given the political compulsions, and I'm not going to blame Mr. Garg on that, do you believe this is the best that Union Budget 2018 could have looked like?
Yeah, it's clearly a pre-election budget, so it was high on political announcements and rhetoric, and in the economics of it is not as strong. It's a challenging year because we have higher oil prices, higher inflation, and higher interest rates. On the three focus areas of job creation, reviving private investment spending, and doing much more to unshackle agriculture. I wouldn't say provide MSP support, but unshackle agriculture and address the rural agrarian distress in a more fundamental way. On all these three things, I don't see as much, but because there were limitations of fiscal. However, I feel that there's been admirable expenditure constraint. I think Swami also wrote about this, that it wasn't entirely populist in terms of a mega loan waiver or something like that. So it's expenditure restraint, and the government is going to benefit because of widening of the tax net, higher inflation means higher nominal GDP growth rate, therefore higher tax collection, so that's going to benefit the fiscal situation. And overall, I think the sentiment is turning gradually upwards. So while we may not see shooting up to 8% GDP growth, but definitely higher than last year. So that's the prognosis before the elections, general elections.
Right, Swami. You've been, you've written your piece. You've said what you had to say. But since we've got Mr. Garg, I'm sure we'd like to know what is it that you liked about the budget, other than the fact that they've sort of not indulged in election freebies and sort of not made it populist. What else is it that you liked in budget 2018?
Well, apart from the fact that they did not go overboard with freebies, there were two things which I thought were very positive. One was that they extended the use of contract labor from a couple of labor-intensive industries to all industries. Now, informally, I would say this was already happening. It is a good thing that this is now a formal policy. This amounts to a very significant labor reform which will make it more attractive for companies to hire people. So I think this is a positive thing, that contract labor can now be used, fixed-term labor contracts can be used in every industry, and this will impart a new form of labor flexibility which we badly need. Secondly, entering the formal sector, there are huge hurdles that the moment you hire somebody in the formal sector, you have to start paying Provident Fund, ESI, various other things, and these are discouraging because these are Provident Fund rates at quite high rates. So here again there was a subvention of 3% which the government was earlier giving for some industries. Now liberalized to all industries. This again is a positive thing. This again I think should help shift people from the informal to the formal sector. So I would say these are two good initiatives on the employment front. On the agricultural side, the proposal to have 22,000 new agricultural markets where you say APMC will not apply. Now, how you will make this work, I am not quite clear, because obviously the state government will have to agree. But if the central government and state government can agree on this 22,000 new markets free of APMC, that I think would be a very positive step towards liberalizing the agricultural markets. I like that one too.
All right, there's something that Swami likes, and it's always very difficult to get Swami's vote of confidence on that and his endorsement. But we've had a very serious discussion on the Indian economy, the Indian budget. But Mr. Garg, before I let you go, I have to ask you something on a lighter note. I'm presuming sleep was easy to come by after many weeks of budget making, and the fact that despite LTCG, the markets reacted not so badly yesterday. Has it been a difficult afternoon for you, given the crash that markets have seen? Due to, of course, various other factors, but LTCG continues to be one of them.
I must say that we expected something like what happened yesterday. So in that sense, it was not entirely unexpected. These are early days, people are working out various things. Some people have started portfolio shuffling already. So I think this kind of reaction to some extent was expected, and very soon I think it gets stabilized, and the long-term benefits of this long-term taxation would also get internalized, and we will move on.
All right, we will move on. On that note, can't thank you enough, Mr. Garg, for being so patient and taking those questions from this wonderful panel this evening on ET Now. Swami, Neelkanth and Ajit Ranade, thank you so much as well for joining in on this wonderful discussion, getting into the fine print of Budget 2018. There's been a lot of noise over the last 24 hours, a lot of people giving their opinion, but this really was a nuanced discussion, trying to get into the fine print of Budget 2018, the numbers that went behind, and some of the logic behind some of those contentious decisions. So thank you for joining us on this edition of the Budget Debate on ET Now.
And it always is going to be a balancing act as far as any budget is concerned. We do hope the well-meaning and the well-intentioned schemes take off, because the devil in the detail and the reality implicitly lies in execution and implementation. But thank you very much for being with us on the India Development Debate. It's been a pleasure chatting with all of you. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Keep it with ET Now.